That's
So
fine.
first we'll start off, I was gonna say tell us your name, but I know you can't reveal that, so you can just say, hey, should we say Rory, or do you think that's...
We call him Roy for the time.
Okay.
So tell me exactly, your occupation and your involvement in this industry. I don't know if it's an industry, but sort of give me a pitch of what your title is and what you do.
I do undercover investigations for animal protection groups. For the 11 years, I've done employment-based investigations, which means I will go to different facilities and I will get employed there and try and uncover everything that's going on, generally how the animals are treated, if there's any illegal activity of any kind. So I work at puppy mills, factory farms, slaughterhouses, and I've also worked at a rendering plant.
Okay. And why did you decide to go in this area of work?
I decided to do investigations for animal protection groups because I originally wanted to be a cop and I wanted to join the FBI. That was my plan. But I was also an animal rights activist. And I realized when I was looking at doing investigations that there's people lining up outside the door of every different unit that exists in the FBI to apply. There's very, very few people working for animal rights groups. So I decided I would try to combine my two passions into one thing.
And has it been a successful career? Is it like a hard thing to get jobs, or is there plenty of work?
It is, depending on how you look at it, it is basically, animal abuse is very prolific, so I have a lot of work to do. And people in my field are not going to go out of work, unfortunately, anytime soon. Animal industries are constantly trying to develop security methods and legislation to keep us from working undercover, and I can thankfully say we keep outsmarting them every year.
And so, what are some of the different undercover investigations that you've been involved in? You named a few, like puppy mills and rendering.
Right.
Just sort of go more into depth on the different things you've been involved in.
I've worked at a couple facilities that would sell random source dogs and cats to research labs. I've worked at a puppy mill. I've visited over 500 puppy mills. I've worked at 3 egg farms, a hog farm, a hatchery. I've worked at a variety of slaughterhouses and a dairy. To name a few, it's been a lot of places over the years. Almost every single place that I go to, in fact, let me correct myself, every single place that I go to where I have access to the animals, I find not just things that I would consider to be abusive, but things that are illegal. They're in violation of the state cruelty statute. Whether it is a corporate facility, it's a family farm, whether it's large or it's small, there's always illegal animal abuse and neglect going on.
And what is animal abuse per se?
Animal abuse, if you look at almost any state statute, animal abuse means that you are not providing adequate veterinary care, not providing adequate shelter, food and water, or you're causing unnecessary suffering. Now, there is an affirmative defense to animal abuse in almost every state that says that you are exempt from the state cruelty statute if what you're doing is a standard agricultural practice. So let's just say that you want to take a pig or a chicken and you want to stick them in something that is so small they cannot turn around, they can't spread their wings or their legs, they can't stand up, they can't move without constantly contacting the enclosure. As long as that's called a battery cage or a gestation crate or a veal crate, it's perfectly legal. If you want to kill a piglet by picking him up by his rear legs and smashing his head into the concrete, perfectly legal because it's called thumping and it's a standard agricultural practice. So if you want to find something that is illegal, you need to prove that something could have been done to help an animal that's in need and was not done, or that there is a standard policy in place that causes not just unnecessary but an unusual amount of suffering. And actually, we find that constantly.
And of course, the main reason we're here to speak with you is about West Coast Rendering.
Right.
So when did you first become aware of West Coast Rendering, and how did you get involved in that?
I worked at West Coast Rendering because a group, Last Chance for Animals, was interested in seeing if this specific plant was selling off protein meal I'm sorry, this group, Last Chance for Animals, was interested in seeing if West Coast Rendering was selling protein meal, which comes from local dogs and cats from veterinary clinics in the area, and if that was going off to be made into pet food.
I'll have you repeat that again.
You got it.
If you ever feel like you mess up, you can start as many
Hit
times
rewind,
as you
okay.
want. So you got involved in West Coast Rendering because, was it a myth or?
Right. Well, it's been uncovered in the past that animals that go into rendering, specifically dogs and cats, they're euthanized animals from a pound or from a veterinary clinic, that they get ground up into protein meal and that gets put into pet food. So Last Chance for Animals wanted to know, how common is this? Is this happening at this major rendering facility right here in Los Angeles, West Coast Rendering? So I went in to check it out, and I determined that it is not happening.
Okay. On that same note, explain a little bit about what was the myth of this occurring? Was it like an online myth, or was it more official?
The reason people believe that dogs and cats end up in dog and cat food is because PETA did an investigation to discover that IAM's dog food had dogs and cats in it, that it was coming from rendering facilities. And so it created this huge fuss of how common is this, and are places still doing it, and are they getting away with it? And, I think it was a legitimate idea to try and see, is this local facility involved in this? But from what I determined, they are not, and every other major rendering plant is either not or doing a really good job of covering it up.
Okay. And do you know anything more specific on IAMS or when that occurred, what year?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No.
That's something to put as a note, Mikhail, as well. So what is Last Chance for Animals? Is it animal rights, or do?
Yeah, Last Chance for Animals is an animal rights organization. They're a pro-vegan animal group that is dedicated to fighting every kind of animal abuse that exists. Most notably fighting Class B dealers that sell dogs and cats to research labs. But they're based out of Los Angeles, and they focus on a lot of local Los Angeles issues. So going to West Coast Rendering was them, looking out for something in their own backyard.
And tell me again what their goal was to investigate West Coast Rendering. They wanted to put someone in the rendering plant to discover if they were doing anything illegal, and then most of all to find the rendering, being used back into pet food.
Yeah, the goal of Last Chance for Animals having me go undercover into West Coast Rendering was to see, is there anything illegal happening, and are there dogs and cats being put into rendering and then being sold off into pet food?
Perfect. Okay. And have you ever worked at a rendering facility before this? Or?
I've never done rendering work before I worked at West Coast Rendering. Fortunately for me, I did have a lot of experience doing a lot of really disgusting jobs, and that helped me. However, like say you work at a hog farm or something, a hog farm in particular, you can smell the place a mile away when you show up. West Coast Rendering, I think it was like 3 blocks away, you can start to smell it. And I really have never worked at a place that smelt worse than West Coast Rendering. It was horrific. It took, every day that I had to pull into work, had to put my game face on to be like, oh yeah, this is normal. It's like, several tons worth of decaying animals is okay.
Can you even explain the smell? Or?
Yeah, this basically what it was is that, so West Coast Rendering, they pick up dead dogs and cats have been euthanized at the pound, at shelters, at veterinary clinics. They'll pick up leftover food, pasta, whatever's gone bad at local restaurants. They'll pick up all of the blood and feathers and manure left over from local small chicken slaughterhouses, live markets. All of that goes into West Coast Rendering. If someone's horse died somewhere, if a sea lion came up and was beached, goes off to West Coast Rendering. And a lot of this stuff has been sitting around in trucks for 72 hours that come from as far away as San Diego. So it's very rotted, covered in maggots, and then it arrives there, and then it just piles up. So when you're in the middle of Los Angeles when you go into West Coast Rendering, and there's seagulls just swarming the area because they're coming in to just eat all of the decaying matter. It is a smell that I never vomited when I was there, but it's the only case where I was actually concerned I might vomit while I was working there. It was pretty disgusting.
And does the LA Bureau of Sanitation pick up the dead animals, or does West Coast Rendering?
West Coast Rendering actually picks up all of the dead animals. So one of the jobs that I had was to drive around in a truck, and it's not as high tech as you might think. It's just like a big metal box on the back of this truck with a bunch of big 50-gallon metal drums in the back. And we would drive around all over Los Angeles. I mean, like Hollywood, Beverly Hills, everywhere. We'd go to every place and just start dumping frozen bodies and chicken guts into the backs of those barrels.
Was it hard to actually get hired, or?
It's pretty easy to get hired. I was the only white guy who was there. There's a lot of immigrants. I guess they just assumed that I had a felony record or something that would make me want to work there. They didn't ask, to tell you the truth. But it was very simple. It was just like, put me on, and as long as I don't vomit, I'm in.
That's interesting. And so what was, your first walking in and first sort of day like?
My first walking in, it was actually like working at any other farm or slaughterhouse, where you walk in and there's just this horrific amount of really disgusting stuff going on, but everyone's acting like it's totally normal, and they're very professional and very cool. And it was just kind of like, put some gloves on and some rubber boots, and then start dumping giant metal drums full of guts and dead animals onto the ground to go into a grinder. And then it was sitting in the passenger seat at first to drive all around Los Angeles and pick up dead animals. That was my first week, pretty much.
And tell me the layout, sort of the setup of the plant. How big it is, and
okay.
Sort of, we're not going to get to see the inside. So what is the inside?
The plant takes up. It's like half of a city block. It's massive. And so you have an office. You have an area where all these different trucks to bring animals in are at. All these trucks to take the protein meal to ship out are at. And then you have the actual area that makes the protein meal, which is like. It's like the biggest oven that you've ever seen in your life. It's like an oven that's the size of two 18-wheelers. And then you have the grinder, which is like the size of an SUV, and there's just a big pit in the ground. And it's like a massive pit, and everything just gets shoved into there. It's like a ton at a time. It gets shoved into there. And then about I don't know how to describe it, like a bread loaf size of just this chunky goo comes spewing out, and that is what everything is turned into. And then it gets baked and dehydrated and turned into the protein powder.
Was there anything illegal that you found going on there, or anything?
The only thing illegal that I found that I did not get on tape, I had an equipment issue on one day, was someone took a raccoon that was live no, it was a possum. Someone had a possum that was live in a truck and chunked it by the tail into the pit to be ground up, but fortunately the possum ran out of the pit. That would have been illegal, cruelty to animals, to just kill an animal for no reason. But that was it. They weren't breaking the laws otherwise. And, there were certainly, the problem that I had with the place, what I found disturbing was that we'd pick up all these dogs and cats, and a lot of them would have collars on and tags on them. And I remember one had a duct tape over the bag, and I think it said "With Love, Bradley" was the name of the dog. And so, someone obviously missed that dog. And every time something would go in the grinder, everyone would take the collars and the tags off. You don't want metal going into there. So it all gets thrown away. And I began to wonder, how many of these people realize their pets are ending up going into this protein meal, which West Coast Rendering, they sell, from what I could determine, their protein meal to another company in the Northwest that then sells it into hog and chicken feed in Asia. So I started calling these veterinary clinics, and I would ask them, what happens with my dog and cat if I can't afford a personal cremation? Every single one of them in the Los Angeles area, without fail, said it's a mass cremation. and it's not a mass cremation, your animal's ground up with a whole bunch of trash in LA and then shipped off as food in Asia.
And tell me about you, Mike, were you micing yourself or putting the video cam? Tell me how you did all of that.
I wore a covert camera to be able to film things so no one knew that I was filming at the facility.
And was that hard to get away with? Were you nervous or?
No, actually, to be honest, no, it wasn't. It wasn't very difficult. It was kind of a standard situation. They were not very high on security. They weren't worried about spies coming in and filming what they're doing. They weren't breaking the law, so they really had nothing to worry about.
And so for people who don't know what rendering is, could you explain?
Oh, sure.
What is rendering and what is like the end outcome of all of this? Rendering is
where you take everything all the filth that you don't want in your society, all of the dead animals from the veterinary clinics, all of the leftover food that's gone bad of a commercial size that you can't put in a dumpster, dead animals that have beached, anything. And you break them down and turn them into a powder that can be used as protein for, you can use it for fertilizer, you can use it for feed. And so for West Coast rendering, it was sent off to be used for feed for livestock in Asia. But it can certainly be used to be made into fertilizer, or animal feed anywhere. But that's what rendering is.
Will you let me know when you need to stop and?
Right.
Okay.
Roadkills are also.
Roadkill, yeah.
Roadkill, yeah. Shit, I forgot. I was just gonna ask something else.
Okay, we'll keep going. Is it scary? I don't know if it's not scary because we say, it's shipped off to Asia, so it's not us. But I think the end product might come back to us. But the fact that the dogs and cats are put to sleep with the drug, and the drug is still in that, and that goes into the end product, and then it's sort of
right. Yeah. So I'm not a vet and I'm not a doctor, so I can't really say what happens to drugs in an animal system that go through the rendering process. All I can say is that they're rendered up with everything else, and then they're in these heated ovens, which turns them into a powder. I don't know at what concentration there's drugs that are left over in that or not. And I don't know exactly what products could be sent back to America from Asia. But if from here it's being fed off to hogs and to chickens, then certainly they're sending that, wherever it's going to go. But what I do know is that I've worked at 3 different egg farms, and at every single egg farm that I've worked at, I've observed that there's 2 of them I personally observed is a process called depopulation, which is where you have an egg barn. Any egg barn is probably going to have, with battery cages, will have about 100,000 birds per barn, right? When it comes after 2 years, and a hen is not going to lay enough eggs to be worth it, so you kill them all. You put them all into these little CO2 tanks. They're dead. And so what I was told with all of these hens is when they get shipped off, they go to a rendering facility, and they're combined with, amongst other things, corn, and then they're fed back to chickens at the egg farm. And so that is something how you have this hen that has laid about 250 eggs a year, which is about how many eggs the average American eats a year. So everyone who eats eggs, you probably have a chicken working just for you somewhere. And then when they're not producing enough, they're not worth anything. So then you grind them up and then you feed them back to another chicken that is going to produce more eggs for somebody. Depending on how you look at it, that is the useful, magical part of the rendering process. When I saw it firsthand, I was not so happy about it. But that's what rendering is it's basically keeps the cycle going.
Do you think rendering is a necessity?
I would think rendering is a necessity. It's just that I don't know if people know. For example, okay, if you have roadkill, why not do something with the roadkill, right? Why not make it something useful? But say you have like a hatchery, there's chickens that are bred for meat and there's chickens that are bred for eggs. And I've worked at the largest hatchery for leghorn chicks, which lay eggs, that exists in the entire world in Spencer, Iowa. and I watched male chicks get ground up alive at birth because they're of no use, not for meat and not for eggs. That gets put into pet food and to fertilizer. So, I mean, is that useful? Well, if you have hundreds of thousands of chicks that are born every week at this one facility that are worth nothing to the industry, I suppose that it's useful to do something with them. But rendering plays a role in society in that aspect, but it also allows us to see that we produce all of this waste for all of these things that we don't necessarily need to have, we don't necessarily need to do. And I think there should be a lot more attention paid to that.
And why do you think it's easy for rendering to get like a bad rap? Are people uneducated about it, or is it just too disgusting?
I think largely, unfortunately, I think it's just that it's disgusting. I think a lot of people don't necessarily.
First sentence about rendering getting a bad rap.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It's okay.
I think rendering gets a bad rap because rendering is just so disgusting. I mean, I've seen a lot of nasty stuff. It's probably the nastiest thing I've ever seen. It's just simply gross. It's not cruel. It's just gross. But rendering is connected to all of these other issues. It's connected to the egg-laying hen. Rendering is connected to the egg-laying hens. It's connected to male chicks being ground up at birth, and then you have to do something with them. It provides an avenue for these things. And on the surface then, when you look at that, you'd think that's a necessary part of society. We need to do something with them. Myself, being in the animal protection movement, I would say we need to dissect those parts and determine how much is it worth finding something useful for all of these millions and millions of butchered and killed animals, and how much do we need to change our consumer habits to decrease that waste so we don't need as much of this rendering process.
In the way you look at the world, if you can step back and be objective, do you ever see that happening?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it's been about 6 years that meat consumption has been on the decline in America. It was certainly on the decline in 2011. It's expected to be on the decline in 2012. That's proportionally and statistically. So I think that the way that society is going, at least the way I hope society is going, is that people will be more willing to face these issues of things like animal abuse and rendering. Because rendering, I understand it's necessary, but when it's connected in some ways to these other issues that we don't want to have to face, I think people are more willing to look at them and learn about them and decide what can they do as consumers to play a positive role in it.
And I want to make a stronger point about everything going into the grinder together, about, descriptive of the meat sometimes with
Right.
the packaging on it. And,
Oh, yeah.
Plastic bags, and
Right.
everything comes out into this product that is, in the end, consumed by an animal, which is eventually consumed by a person.
Right. So in the rendering pit at West Coast Rendering, if there's a dog, it's in a trash bag. It's supposed to be pulled out of the bag. They take collars off the animals, take all the metal off of them. But very often, trash would just end up in there. So it seems kind of an arbitrary decision of whether they would bother or not. Sometimes animals would go in the trash bag. If there was a piece of trash that was left in there, that would just get dumped in, a styrofoam cup, a trash bag. Someone's gloves was the most common thing. Someone would pull off their gloves and they didn't want to bother to go to a trash can. The biggest trash can on earth is right next to them, so they would just dump it all into the rendering pit. Plastic, leather, rubber, styrofoam, it all went in the pit.
Was there animals like with maggots and rats?
Yeah, there was an enormous, I don't know what percentage of the protein meal is made of maggots, but I would assume it's a significant portion. Everything was constantly everything was rotting, so there was a lot of maggots in it. And I remember at one point, we had this shipment come in from San Diego. They started putting stuff in that truck 3 days before and finished it that morning and then sent it out to us. And there was a dead sea lion, there was a dead bull, and there was this one trash can. It's this 50-gallon metal drum, and it was filled with eggshells, so it should have been pretty light. But it was extremely heavy because over the 3 days, it was just swarming with maggots. Like if I just stood there and didn't make any noise, I could hear it moving. And so I had to move that to the edge of the truck and dump it. And that's the only time in my career I ever thought I might vomit. And then I felt something hitting my neck, and I looked and I saw the maggots were crawling up the walls of the truck, and they were actually going onto the ceiling, and they were literally raining onto our heads.
And going back,
It's hard to listen.
and going back to the goal of trying to figure out whether or not this is used into pet food.
Right.
What are some of the things that you did in order to find that out? Did you like secretly have to go look through files that they might have? Or
yeah.
What are the different avenues that you took in order to find out whether or not this is happening?
To determine if they were selling for pet food, all that I had to do there was I had to just ask their secretary and ask the owner when he arrived to determine exactly who do you sell to. And so they told me that there was a company they sell to in the Northwest. We found court records separate from the undercover assignment that showed that there was someone in this company who came to be a witness for them in court, and then he disclosed under oath that he sells out to, for livestock feed in Asia, and swore up and down they don't sell for pet food. So then what I did was I called, not just in LA, but in just about every major city in the US. It was a lot of phone calls. I called every single major rendering plant that I could find. And I would say, hey, I'm with such and such a veterinary clinic. Will you come pick up animals for me? For every single one that would say yes, I would then say that I was with a pet food company and that I'm interested in purchasing protein meal. Can I buy it from them? Every single one would absolutely turn me down and say no, because we pick up from dog and cat clinics.
So there wasn't anything fishy going on there.
Didn't appear to be.
Okay.
This seems to clear the myth.
Yeah. Why do you think there's a myth?
I think there's a myth because, PETA seems to have uncovered this occurred, but I think it's also because the rendering business is connected to the animal ag business, selling protein meal for livestock feed, right? And I feel very comfortable saying that the animal ag business constantly lies to consumers. I would dare them to sue me for that statement because I can back it up with incredible amount of hours of footage to prove that. They constantly lie about how they treat their animals, about what is it they're selling customers, about how their animals are housed. I mean, everything across the board. And so I think that people are starting to learn this and they just don't trust anything remotely associated to animal feed or animal agriculture.
I was going to say, should we go into some of the lies? Or, the pet food industry is that agriculture business as well. It's animal feed. That's how they treat pet food. So how much educated are you about the pet food industry? Because I just wanted to ask, do you think, they put up a front and lie about,
right,
certain marketing techniques and stuff? How much research have you done about it?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not a big pet food guy, yeah.
So are there any other alternatives to rendering? I know you mentioned, people changing their consumption and stuff. What alternatives would there be? Like throwing stuff in a landfill and then the landfill becoming...
Well, so to be honest, I think that one of the best options that we have is if people... I'm going to make a statement. It's going to sound a little outlandish, but I will explain it. One of the best things people can do to try and decrease the amount of waste that is produced and often goes to rendering is to have a more vegan diet. And the reason that I say that is you don't have to worry about all of these chickens that have to be killed every 2 years. You don't have to worry about every single male leghorn chick being ground up alive. You don't have to worry about all of these animals that are killed, that are disposed of, that are involved in animal agriculture, and where they have to go because those animals won't be there. The human population won't need them. Any and all of the grains and everything else that we'll raise to go to these animals so that we can then eat them will simply go to be feeding the human population. In fact, at that point, there would be a huge surplus. I would say to decrease the problem of this excess of trash and waste and the animal abuse associated with it with rendering, eat vegan.
Do you think animals being rendered as animal abuse, or since they're dead? Or do we need to repeat that because of the...
No, that's cool.
Okay.
Just wait 2 seconds.
Next question, is that animal abuse, the animals being rendered, or?
Rendering itself is not animal abuse. And you know, if everyone in the world was vegan and no one was ever hurting an animal on earth, you would still need rendering. There's always going to be waste of some kind. By itself, it's not animal abuse. It just has this connection to animal ag, which I think is important to note.
And do you think the rendering, we've kind of covered that, is it safe? It's like the end product safe?
I wouldn't eat that shit, but I can't specifically say if rendering is safe or not. I mean, you know, if you're gonna, I mean, I have seen all kinds of dogs and cats that were given whatever drugs and that were dumped into a pit with all kinds of trash, and then they're baked at an incredibly hot temperature for a long time, and then a powder comes out. I mean, I'm not gonna fucking eat it, but if the FDA says it's okay, you know, if it goes into human food somehow, then it's okay. If they say it's safe to feed that to an animal somewhere else, and that animal is then butchered, is that animal okay to eat? I mean, again, I'm not gonna eat it. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Just this first hand for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Let's see, what are they cooking in here? Protein powder.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not bad.
Salty, yeah.
Just add more salt. In there.
At what temperature? Do you remember at what temperature it's cooked at? Is it like the base level temperature to where they don't have to pay much energy?
I don't know. I don't remember. I remember it being really, really hot, but I can't remember exactly.
Okay. How long did you work there again?
I worked there for 2 weeks.
Okay. I'll have you put that in a sentence just in case.
Oh, sure. I worked at West Coast Rendering for 2 weeks during April of 2007.
Those must have been 2 long weeks. Can I go home?
It was a very short assignment, though. 2 weeks is short, so it's
So
good.
did you find, I know you kind of said this, that they didn't have anything to hide. They weren't shady with anything. You went there thinking it might be shady.
No, yeah, I mean, I went there just wondering, you know, what are they going to hide? And so, you know, I wasn't going to like jack their computers, but everyone that I talked to seemed to be honest. So once we backed that up with court records and then the pretext phone calls, we just felt that was fine. There was nothing really shady that was going on. I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, they're hiring illegal immigrants, but I probably shouldn't have said that because I really don't care. I'm not worried about that, but no.
And what do you want people to know that might be gross the heck out about rendering, and these animal activists who are posting on blogs that this is occurring? Animals are being rendered back into pet food and you shouldn't buy Purina.
Yeah, I would say, you know, based upon my investigation, I found no evidence to suggest that there are rendered dogs and cats going into pet food in America. From the things that I've seen, I'm not going to be like dumbfounded if someone discovers it, but I did not find any evidence at all to suggest that.
We'll take a quick break real fast so I can
Cool.
reevaluate the questions and if there's anything.
Okay, would you actually the other side?
Where?
A little closer to you. Yeah. Bam.
Ready?
Go for it.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm rolling.
We're good?
Yep.
Okay, both cameras are rolling.
You
My
wanna give
audio is
another
rolling.
one?
Let's do it really close
This
to the
side?
head, you know?
Close to
Yeah.
your
Okay.
head,
Yeah, that'll work.
Ready?
Alright, I don't know how much you might know about this, but did you go into any of the money and finances of, I think the city might pay West Coast Rendering to pick these up? I'm trying to figure out if there's money to be made.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so anytime West Coast Rendering picks up anything from somewhere, they get paid for it. West Coast Rendering gets paid for it. So if you have a bunch of dead animals on your property, you pay someone to come pick them up always.
And do you think West Coast Rendering is making a big profit off of doing this?
That I don't know the exact numbers.
There is public record of LA County how much they paid per year to West Coast Rendering to pick up county shelter and roadkill. I mean, it's several $100,000.
Shit.
I think it's like north of $300,000 that the county pays, but then they make money from selling the protein thing at the end as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that I'm sure it costs a lot of overhead to run that place, but we didn't get paid shit working there. So
Yeah, how much is somebody shoving dead things in the pit? How much is that?
I'm trying. I mean, that was some years. That was like 5 years ago now. But I'm trying to think. I think it was like around $9 an hour or $8 an hour or something. Yeah, we did not get paid a lot.
Did they
So
have a hard time finding staff?
they had a full staff. I mean, and most of those guys had been there for a long time. Months, years, all immigrants.
Yeah.
A couple of them could speak good English, so they took what they could get.
And the city contracts the rendering plant? Is it?
Right. The city of Los Angeles. So, they contract West Coast Rendering. I mean, everyone uses West Coast Rendering in LA. Any veterinary clinic, anywhere you have dead animals that need to be picked up, or you have a commercial amount of some kind of organic waste someone has to pick up, West Coast Rendering every time.
And so the video footage that we're going to see, I don't know how specific, I guess you watched everything again, and we haven't had a chance to watch it yet, so I can't ask specific questions on what we're going to see, but in your mind, sort of, if we're seeing the video footage on the screen, how would you narrate what's going on?
Well, so you'll see in the footage, you'll see a freezer that was picked up and is full of dead dogs, and it's just kind of dumped out. And so you'll see all these dog bodies just kind of pile on the ground, and then they'll be thrown into the pit. You're going to see 2 horses that were dead. Don't know how the horses died. Don't know where they came from, but you'll see them get pulled out of an 18-wheeler and hit the ground, and then their hooves have to get cut off because their hooves won't go through the grinder. And so the horses are in bad shape, and one of them gets kind of ripped in half as the body's pulled along the ground to go into the pit. And you'll see all of these workers doing their job as professional as possible, as if none of this is disturbing in any way, because it's what they do. It's just another day's work. So you'll see all of the goo, everything gets ground up, going into a giant bin, people taking it off to go into the ovens. And then the pit itself, just this enormous pile of trash and waste and dead bodies of every kind, just waiting to get ground up.
Was there any wow factor that you caught on footage that you might have had a case from, or all of this was just disgusting stuff?
Yeah, it was just disgusting stuff. There was nothing that was criminal. Last Chance for Animals did go public with it. They wanted the public to understand this is what happens to your pet when your pet is deceased, and you go for what your vet will tell you is a mass cremation. It's not a mass cremation. I think people have the right to know that, but there was nothing criminal. So the case was what it was.
Okay. So they wanted to go public just to educate people.
Yeah, I mean, the idea behind once they had that information, what all Last Chance for Animals could do is educate people, which I would want to know as well. I mean, I remember, I'm a big dog guy. I love dogs, and I remember I saw a dog that was running down the street while I was working the case. I was in Los Angeles, and I saw this dog. It's like a pit mix running down the street on Sunset Boulevard, and went through this intersection. And I can always keep my cool while I'm working, no matter what I'm seeing. If it's animal abuse, whatever, I'll keep my cool. But I saw that dog, and I just flipped out, because I thought, I am not going to see that fucking dog thrown into a goddamn grinder, And so I pull my truck over, put the hazards on, I go running down, and I'm trying to get, the dog's on the sidewalk, and I'm trying to get on his side so he doesn't run in the street, but he sees me and he darts across the road. Now the dog ended up okay and ran off, but I remember that this Mercedes, this guy hit the dog, I clipped him, and the dog ran off, and the guy kept rolling through the intersection. And even though I can keep my cool with whatever I do at work, I was so pissed at that guy that I just smashed my hand down on the back of his car and cussed him out. And he just looked at me and just floored it and took off to the intersection. I was just too worked up and pissed from seeing all of these dead dogs with all these tags, their names, their phone numbers, and these little collars with little paw prints on them, and all getting thrown off and all just thrown into a pit to be livestock feed. You know, I mean, it's just, I know that's just not right to me. It's somebody's family member. People should know where they go when they die. There should be respect for them when they die.
And you would agree that pet owners are misled when they go to the vet and they're told mass cremation or something.
Right. Yeah. If you go to call any vet, any major city where there's a rendering plant anywhere in the country, and say,
Hold on 1 second.
"Oh, sure."
You
Buildings
get
falling
the
apart.
temperature as it's cooling down.
Oh.
You go off the ceiling, does that, it's annoying. It always, during the day when the AC is a bit worse.
Huh.
Huh. Interesting.
So people are being misled. That
Right.
would be the downside, bad thing that's happening from just this whole situation is that people aren't told exactly what happens.
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, the only bad thing that was really discovered with this was that people are misled about what happens to their pets when the vet says your pet goes to a mass cremation. Your pet's being rendered.
And that sort of is an easy lead into, well, they're not really being open about the rendering part, so maybe they're not being opening about,
Right. Yeah, so that's where someone's imagination could go wild and think, well, if they're lying to me about what's happening to my pet, then where is it really going? And is the rendering plant lying about where they're selling it? It's a legitimate question. It should be looked into. From what I found in 2007, was it does not seem to be the case that they're ending up in pet food. I would not want to hinder anyone from doing an investigation now in 2012.
Who do you think lies to the people? Are the vets aware that the pets are not cremated, or are the vets unaware and uninterested and they say it's being cremated, the pets are sent? I mean, because I know vets don't know shit about animal food either, so they should eat this, but they don't know what they're talking about. So who is lying in this process?
Yeah, I don't know exactly where the lie comes from for each vet who says, oh, your pet goes to mass cremation. All I know is that it's gonna say on some form that somebody gets at the veterinary office, West Coast rendering. It says rendering. It does not say cremation anywhere on there. So somebody is making shit up at some point at every single one of these vet offices that I called. I don't know if that's the secretary or if that's the vet or if that's a policy. I just know that somewhere along the line somebody decides to make it sound good.
One thing that is evident in pet food is the euthanization drug that ends up, I think that's another reason why people think that pets are being rendered back into pet food is because the euthanization drug is, small traces are found in the pet food. But the West Coast rendering on their website said, oh, it's from the horses that are put to sleep or the cows. Do you think that's legitimate?
Well, if there's traces of a euthanization medication being found in pet food, does that mean that it's coming from dogs and cats that are rendered, that are euthanized at a veterinary office? I mean, ultimately, I don't know. I mean, that is suspicious to me. That would make me want to go more in depth and look into it. But if the same medication is used on dogs and cats, it's also used on livestock, then I suppose that could be the case as well. It depends. Most people don't have a cow for a pet, but a lot of people do have horses for a pet. So,
is that a legitimate answer from them? Because you know more about this than us. To my understanding, everything's rendered together. So if it's a horse or a cow, then that's rendered with.
Well, yes, it depends. So you have some rendering plants. Well, they'll put dogs and cats and everything together, and then you have other rendering plants. So, for example, I called several rendering plants in the country, and when I said, hey, I'm with a veterinary office, will you pick up my dogs and cats? I had many places tell me, we cannot do that because we sell to pet food. And that would be feeding them back to their own. So they were upfront on the phone with me about that, which means they pick up everything else specifically.
I'm going to go back through a few
Sure.
more that.
Can I have one quick question?
Yeah. Ask all the questions
Do you have any idea what volume are they dealing with? Because I think I read West Coast Rendering runs 24/7.
Oh, not when I was there.
Oh, okay.
It was one shift. It was like a 10, 12-hour shift during the day, and that was it. I mean, you do have people that are constantly coming in, like if we were doing the truck route,
Yeah.
we would come in hours after the workers had left doing the rendering, and so it.
I'm sorry. When you
Oh,
talk,
sure.
actually, still look at him. So I asked
Oh,
a
sure.
question, just for the highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think West Coast Rendering didn't run 24/7 when I was there. Certainly, there's stuff always baking in the ovens 24/7, but there's not people bringing in animals and shoveling them into the pit. When we were running the truck route, we would come in after everyone else had left because we had a longer day. But it was a 10, 12-hour shift of throwing dead animals in the pit, and that was it.
And do you know how the volume per year, per week, per month?
Oh,
whatever the
no.
amount of
We
tons
heard
they're
360
processing?
ton, 360 ton a year that we read, but
We read
Wow,
like some of
that's-
it in the several hundreds.
I would have thought it'd be more, but I don't know. Don't know.
How many truckloads a day do they bring?
There were as far as like those big trucks with how many 50-gallon drums are in a truck? I'm trying to remember. So let's say you have 12s, you got 600 gallons worth of stuff. 2 of those would come in a day, and then you'd have like an 18-wheeler come in a day as well. So it was a lot. I mean, it was a lot of shit coming in there every day. Yeah.
And was the plant, one second, was it sanitary, the whole thing? Did you find it sanitary, unsanitary, putting people at risk?
So the conditions at the facility were certainly not sanitary. Someone lived at the facility, actually. There was a worker that lived in a room and had a cot at the plant. And so, I mean, we would all go and then we'd eat lunch in his room. So basically what it was is that, everyone wears their gloves, handles all kinds of decaying shit, and then throws their gloves off, and then the taco truck would pull in, and then we'd all eat burritos and tacos from the taco truck in this guy's room who lived there. I wouldn't use the word sanitary to describe it. It was one of the filthiest places that I've worked at, actually. But that's typical for an environment like that. Like normally at a farm, people will go and their hands are literally covered in shit, and then they'll reach into a chip bag and just be eating chips and stuff like that. So if these people were used to that kind of an environment, I'm sure it was nothing to them.
Now, did you do anything different? Like, were you yourself, or did you have to act or adapt to the environment?
Oh yeah, I mean, all I had to do was just act like them. That's pretty much undercover work. Is you just assimilate yourself into the environment, try and look and act and talk like everyone else. So I had to use my best Spanish, of course, but yeah, in that environment, it was actually just acting casual and just focusing on the task at hand. That's all it was. Those guys really reminded me of farm hands. Nobody was goofing off. Nobody was being an idiot for the most part. So there was a lot of driving around Los Angeles listening to my coworker sing at the top of his lungs to a Tejano station, but that was it.
No one ever suspected you within the 2 weeks, or?
Oh no one ever suspected that I was undercover or anything.
Alright, 1 second. Sanitation.
The guy who lives out there, I mean, that's in his skin. He probably doesn't get laid very often.
There's radiation.
On Saturday night, you go in the bar. I mean, your hair, your skin. This is not something you wash off. It has to just grow.
I know.
It's
Yeah.
It will take weeks to get that smell off. I mean,
Grows back extra bacteria and stuff.
Yeah, I wonder about that because, that guy, I mean, normally it's like these guys come over here, they have family with them, right? So he's staying by himself. He's running from some shit. I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, I've encountered people like that. I was at a calf ranch in Texas, and I'm in the Panhandle. There's like 400 people in that county. There's no one around in this place. And there's a guy there's like, yeah, I came here from all immigrants. Like, yeah, I came here from Miami. 2 guys are like, yeah, we came here from Chicago, and they wouldn't tell me why they left. So I assume that dude did something, and that's where he hit out at,
And in the end,
Yeah.
Chris, what was your overall opinion after an investigation? Did you learn anything? What did you take away from it?
My takeaway from working at West Coast Rendering was that, again, like as an investigator, it's my job to just find what's there. Doesn't matter if it's what people expect or not. My takeaway was that they weren't breaking the law, but that nobody has any idea what happens to their pet when their pet is euthanized at the veterinary clinic and then the body is left there. Nobody realizes their pet is going to become fertilizer or livestock feed.
And do you think rendering plants should be more open about what they do, just to educate people and say,
Hey,
hey,
can we take 2 seconds?
Yep. Sure. Oh, 2 seconds.
It's actually a really good time. Would you hold that?
Almost last. Going up.
All good.
Back in business.
And
Yep.
cool. So do you think rendering plants should be more open, just to sort of die down the myth, or is it one of these things that are always going to be given a bad rap?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I think rendering will probably always be given a bad rap just because it's so disgusting. However, I don't think it would hurt them to be more open. You know, when you're talking about companion animals being rendered, I think that the rendering plants and the veterinary offices need to be open about what's happening so that people know. You know, that's family members that are being left there and then ground up. I mean, that's horrific. It shouldn't be the case. But I think that as far as you know, chickens being rendered fed back to chickens, you know, male baby chicks being ground up alive and then put into pet food and fertilizer here in America, I think that they should be very open about that. And I don't think that they ever will, because that is directly linked to animal abuse that animal protection groups fight against. They will always try and keep that a secret.
Would it be one of those things where companies, if you present yourself as you don't have anything to hide, like we met with a company that did, you know, their own dog food, come into the kitchen, see what we do, we don't care, we ain't got nothing to hide, but this is sort of the opposite. So if they would present themselves better, there wouldn't be this myth in question.
Yeah. I mean, if they're open about what they do, that should eliminate the myths. They all have to be open. Again, in 2007, my investigation led me to believe that there's no rendering plants selling for pet food in America, right? The dogs and cats are not going into dog and cat food in America. I don't know if that's the case now or not, but that's really what I believed then. That said, if the entire industry is open, I'd be pleased. But if I've learned anything from undercover work over the years, it's that if someone is open about something, it looks one way in an interview, it looks one way on camera. The shit is always different when people do not know they're being filmed. So, yeah, I mean, if they don't want to be open and they don't want to talk to you, I would assume it's because they have something to hide, but.
Do you remember the company that West Coast Rendering sells to in, was it Northern California?
No, I'm gonna have to. I have someone at LCA looking for those records.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, they only had half my footage from the case. I don't know what to say about that.
And I believe that sums up my stuff. I want to ask one more that's not directly related to pet food, but could be part of your story. What was your proudest moment as an undercover?
My proudest moment as an undercover investigator, I would not have said this 12, or I guess it'd be 11 years ago, 10 years ago maybe that I got this. I would not have said this then, but I will say this now. My first assignment ever, I received a Coin of Excellence from the U.S. Attorney's Office of Arkansas. And it's just something civilians get if you do something that they think is really cool, right? And so at the time, it's like, well, it's a little coin. I mean, you know, whatever. There was, I worked at a place that was selling random source animals to research labs. The place got raided and shut down. Animals got saved, and that was great. The reason that coin means so much to me now is because one of the biggest problems I've ever encountered in my career constantly is corruption from law enforcement and the government. And we are seeing more cooperation from local and federal law enforcement now, especially in the last 4 years, than we ever have before. Cops are just doing their jobs and doing a damn good job more often than not. And I thought about that coin back then, that it was my first case, and a federal agency actually recognized what an animal rights group did to help the government. And all of these years, all I've been doing is trying to find another case like that, get that same level of success, that same cooperation from the cops and the government, and it's starting to happen again.
Tell me about the law that was recently passed and how that affects everything.
So what is a law that we think is about to be signed by the governor in Iowa is this law in Iowa makes it illegal to lie on an application if you're working at an animal business, an animal agriculture business. And so it'd be a misdemeanor. So if they ask you on the application, are you associated with an animal rights group, and you put no, you just committed a misdemeanor by doing that to get hired. Now, there was a senator in Iowa, though, who he was talking on the floor to the Senate, and he was saying that activists stage the things that they do. And he referenced the Conklin Dairy Farm case in Ohio, saying that was staged, and the main perp on that case, who was abusing animals, was hired by activists. I was the undercover investigator on that case. I know for a fact that's not true, and I can prove it. However, when you are a congressperson, you are exempt from prosecution when you are giving testimony to Congress, even if it is found to be false, which means that senator was lying about animal abuse so he could get a law passed to prevent people from lying so they can then uncover animal abuse. I'm hoping we beat it, but it is directly aimed at stopping undercover investigations.
If that's passed, then, and it takes on a more nationwide approach and more states take that on, if this is happening, basically it opens up for companies to be able to do what we're suspecting them to do, and we can't figure that out.
Right. If you stop people from getting ground level intelligence, actually working undercover, going in when people don't know that they're being watched, and find out what's going on when people don't know anyone's there. Once you cut that level of intelligence out, people can get away with anything they want. Then go ahead and run the conspiracy theories wild, because it'll all be true.
Because then it could be possible that they could, in the future, if this is passed and people can't do undercover investigations to find this out.
Right. I would assume it would be much more likely than that a rendering facility could sell ground up dogs and cats into American pet food. There always has to be some other third party to find out what is going on. The best way to do that is undercover work.
Any questions that you have, either that intrigue you?
That's pretty thorough. My favorite question is there anything else we need to know about rendering, about anything pet food?
That's all I got is my West Coast rendering job. That's all in my phone calls. That's all I know.
Different.
Go work at all these rendering plans.
You're gonna find something.
Here's your boots and gloves. Go.
So, that's that.
That's that.
Anyway, I do just want